Between 1945 and 1962, the United States carried out 331 atmospheric nuclear tests and, to this day, the government denies the genetic effects caused by radioactivity. While doing some soil analysis to find out if the area is safe, a group of scientists are attacked in the New Mexico desert by a man who uses a pickaxe to hit them. After eliminating the entire team, the psychopath ties the bodies to the back of his car and drives off, dragging his victims along the road. A few kilometers away, while resting for the afternoon, Tom hears a noise coming from outside and goes out to investigate. Frightened, he grabs his gun to check if there are any intruders on his property, but finds no one and decides to return home. Tom recently covered up the perishment of a young woman who was traveling on her way to California and is now trying to figure out how to get rid of her belongings. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a horn and goes out to meet a family who have stopped for gas before continuing their journey to San Diego. While the couple talks to the gas attendant, their children go off to use the restroom. Meanwhile, Beauty, the family dog, gets out of the trailer and breaks into the convenience store. At that moment, Lynn, Catherine's mother, goes after the animal and spots the woman's handbag among Tom's belongings. Just then, the man appears and the young woman returns to the trailer with her dog. Before the family has a chance to continue their journey, the gas station attendant goes to talk to Carter and advises him to turn left onto a dirt road a few kilometers ahead. According to him, the road is a shortcut to San Diego and will help the family save a few hours on their journey. When they arrive at the place indicated by Tom, Ethel takes the map to try to find out where they are, and Carter doesn't notice when a row of thorns suddenly appears in the middle of the road. After passing them, the driver loses control of the vehicle and almost flips over. Luckily, he manages to hold on to the steering wheel, but ends up crashing into a giant rock. After the accident, the passengers get out of the car frightened, trying to understand what has happened, and discover that, for some reason, all the tires have burst. After checking that his relatives are all right, Carter tries to find out how to call a tow truck, as they are in the middle of the desert and there is no phone signal. Seeing their dogs running away, Bobby immediately goes after them and Lynn tries to calm her husband down, as Doug makes it clear from the start that he didn't want to go on that trip. While trying to figure out why his tires burst, Carter comes to the conclusion that it was the result of the excessive heat and tries to use the radio to call for help. However, he can't get through and realizes that he'll have to get to the other side of the mountains to look for a phone signal. Before leaving, Carter helps his family set up camp and gives his youngest son a gun so that he can protect his mother and sisters while he is away. At this point, Carter has a new plan and decides to return to the gas station while his son-in-law crosses the hills to try and get a cell phone signal. However, instead of accepting a gun to protect himself, Doug says he won't need a firearm to call for help and claims to be a pacifist. Carter's goal is to borrow Tom's car to pick up his family before nightfall, so he leaves Bobby in charge while he's gone. Before leaving, Carter prays with his family and then he and Doug go their separate ways. What the family doesn't realize is that there is a group of mutants hiding in the mountains, watching from afar as they prepare an attack. While waiting to be rescued, Ethel prepares a meal for her children and Lynn laments the fact that the accident happened just as the family was about to celebrate her mother's birthday. Annoyed at being stuck in the middle of nowhere, Brenda says that if they had followed the route indicated on the map, they would have arrived in California by now. At this point, Bobby notices that the dogs are very agitated, but he can't detect the reason, and, when Brenda opens the trailer door, Beauty runs off again. Worried about the animal once again, Bobby goes after it, but ends up getting lost among all the rocks he finds along the way. Suddenly, during the search, the young man hears some noises emitted by the dog and realizes that Beauty is in trouble. Even though he's scared, he decides to continue his search and picks up a rock to defend himself against a possible attack. However, a few meters ahead, Bobby finds the animal's body completely bloodied and soon realizes that it is eliminated. While trying to find out the cause of elimination, the young man realizes that the dog has had its abdomen completely torn apart and its organs removed. Terrified by the scene, he runs back to the trailer, but on the way he has an accident and faints after falling from the top of a rock. Minutes later, Judy finds the young man's body and tries to wake him up, but is interrupted by the arrival of Google. Meanwhile, Doug continues walking until he reaches the other side of the hill and finds a vehicle graveyard. Surprised by his discovery, he decides to go there to investigate and finds numerous bloodstains on the bodies of cars that have apparently been there for a long time. Even in the face of the vehicle dump, Doug is undeterred and walks calmly through the crowded area with a teddy bear found inside one of the cars in his hands. At dusk, Carter finally arrives at the gas station and goes into the convenience store looking for Tom, but he can't find him. When he sees a telephone, the man tries to use it to call for help, but soon realizes that the device isn't working and continues his search for the attendant. When he finds the bag, Carter decides to rummage through it and finds the ear of the young woman who owned all those things and was attacked by Tom. At that moment, he realizes that something is wrong and pulls out his gun to defend himself if necessary. When he gets to Tom's room, the man finds numerous posters from old newspapers reporting on the damage caused by nuclear weapons. At the time the tests were carried out, several miners refused to leave their land and, because of the radioactivity to which they were exposed, their children were born completely deformed. Years later, countless tourists began disappearing into the desert and the police were never able to find them. Worried about his family, Carter runs out into the yard and gets into Tom's car, which is unlocked. After finding the key, the man starts the vehicle, but finds the gas station attendant in the bathroom with a bottle of whiskey in his hand and starts questioning him. However, instead of answering his questions, Tom uses his own gun to blow his head off, because he couldn't live with all the guilt he felt about the crimes he had committed. Confused, Carter tries to understand what is going on and suddenly hears numerous voices coming from the surrounding area. In an attempt to keep his enemies at bay, he starts shooting all over the place and gets back into his vehicle to drive away. However, before Carter can start the car, the man hiding in the back seat attacks him, knocking his head against the windshield. When his victim is disoriented, Jupiter uses a cart to drag him into a cave, which is the way to the village where the mutants live. Meanwhile, in the middle of the desert, Ethel and her daughters go out to look for Bobby, as he has been missing for several hours. When he hears his mother's voice, the young man wakes up and Ruby leaves, as she realizes that there are other people approaching the place. When she returns to the trailer, Ethel cleans her son's head wound and Bobby decides to keep Beauty's elimination a secret so as not to frighten his mother and sisters. Just then, he hears Beastie barking and grabs his father's gun before going out to check what's going on. Worried, Ethel goes after him, but Bobby orders her to stay in the trailer with her sister. However, when he arrives outside, the young man discovers that the barking was to announce the arrival of his brother-in-law, who is back after a long walk. Relieved, Lynn comes out of the trailer to hug her husband and Doug tells her that he has found a huge crater full of old vehicles. The bad news is that Doug couldn't get a phone signal, because even after crossing the hills, he couldn't find the road. Just then, Bobby reveals that he's worried about his father and Doug says that if Carter doesn't show up by midnight, the whole family will go after him. Meanwhile, Ethel and Brenda decide to take a nap, but Bobby can't sleep because he's worried about his family's safety. Suddenly, the young man realizes that Beastie, who was tied up outside the trailer, has managed to escape and goes out to look for him. In the meantime, Pluto breaks into the trailer and attacks Brenda. While looking for his dog, Bobby hears some human noises and runs to warn his family about the people on the other side of the hills. However, faced with his brother's despair, Lynn tells him that he's worrying too much because they're in the middle of nowhere and there's no way a human being could live there. To try and prove that he's telling the truth, Bobby decides to tell her that he found Beauty perished D and her abdomen had been cut open. On hearing this, Doug becomes convinced that his brother-in-law is telling the truth and goes out to check what's going on. Just then, Ethel wakes up to her husband's screams. Carter had been tied to a tree near the family camp and the mutants had set fire to the man's body while he was still alive. When he realizes that his father is in trouble, Bobby rushes to help him and Doug grabs the fire extinguisher to put out the fire and save his father-in-law. Just then, Lizard appears and devours the two birds that were trapped in a cage inside the trailer. He then attacks Pluto and orders him to let the girl go. However, instead of following Lizard's orders, the man revolts and starts smashing everything he comes across. Desperate, Brenda starts screaming and Lynn rushes to her aid. However, when she arrives at the trailer, the young woman sees one of the monsters holding her baby and hits it with a frying pan. However, the creature manages to immobilize her and points the gun at Catherine. Seeing her baby at risk, the woman is paralyzed and decides not to react. Luckily, Ethel appears just in time and is about to smash the monster's head in with a rock when Lizard points his gun at her and pulls the trigger. At that moment, Doug and Bobby are picking up Carter's body, which couldn't be saved in time. When they hear the gunshot, the pair run back to the trailer, but can't get there in time to save Lynn. After seeing her mother eliminated, the young woman revolts and uses a screwdriver to pierce the monster's leg. Furious, the lizard explodes Lynn's head and Brenda screams in despair, having just witnessed the brutal elimination of all the women in her family. Seeing Bobby and Doug approaching, the deformed monsters decide to flee, as Lizard discovers that his ammunition has run out. When he enters the trailer, Doug finds his wife's body on the floor and revolts. He immediately goes to check if his daughter is all right and realizes that the criminals have taken her. While watching the family through a pair of binoculars, Google is attacked by Beastie, who approaches silently and bites the creature's neck. Noticing that his mother-in-law is still alive, Doug tries to stop the bleeding, but soon realizes that there is no way to save her, so he does his best to support Ethel while waiting for her to perish. After his mother's elimination, Bobby grabs his gun and prepares to go after the criminals who destroyed his family, but Doug stops him from leaving because he knows the young man won't be able to deal with those monsters on his own. Just then, the survivors hear the voice of one of the monsters approaching and, while Brenda panics, Bobby prepares to shoot. When he hears the noises getting closer, he pulls the trigger and Doug goes outside to investigate. Outside, he spots a human arm holding a radio and soon realizes that it was Beastie who brought this gift for its owners. Through that walkie-talkie, Doug manages to communicate with the monsters and orders them to return his daughter, but all he hears is Catherine's crying. When he discovers that his baby is still alive, Doug decides to go after her and enlists the help of his dog to sniff out the hiding place of his enemies. On the way, he finds the bloodstains of Google, who despite having survived Beastie's attack, was seriously injured. After entering the mines, Doug sees countless photos hanging on makeshift tombstones and continues into the cave in the hope of finding the monsters who captured his daughter. After a few minutes of walking, the man reaches the other side of the cave and finds a village full of very simple houses, where the deformed stay. Years ago, that village was the target of tests and, until recently, was considered an area at risk of radiation. As he walks cautiously through the seemingly abandoned area, Doug hears his daughter crying and discovers that Catherine has been left alone in the bedroom of one of the houses. Relieved to know that the baby is alive, he tries to break into the house, but his plan is interrupted when one of those monsters appears and Doug has to hide with his dog. As soon as the creature drives away, he leaves Beastie hidden inside the vehicle and breaks into the house to rescue Catherine. On the way to the bedroom, Doug spots Big Mama, a grown woman who was never able to have children, so she spent her whole life playing with dolls to try and fulfill her desire to build a family. After picking up his daughter, the man sneaks towards the door, only to be caught by Big Mama, who quickly gets up to try and retrieve the baby. When he is hit, Doug faints and, when he wakes up, he realizes that he has been imprisoned inside a trunk along with several pieces of human bodies. When he realizes how much trouble he's in, the man despairs and tries to escape. After a few minutes, he finally manages to open the lid of the trunk and retrieves his baseball bat. At this point, Doug intensifies his search for his daughter, as he plans to leave that disgusting place as soon as possible. During the search, he comes across a man so physically deformed that he can't even stand up and has spent his entire life in a wheelchair. When asked about Catherine's whereabouts, Christ says he doesn't know where she is and starts smiling when Pluto breaks in. When the monster enters the house and starts destroying everything in its path, Doug tries to escape to the second floor, but his enemy pulls him back. However, before he has a chance to eliminate the invader, Pluto is attacked by Beastie and starts a duel against the animal while Doug hides in the bathroom. To ensure that the monster won't be able to reach him, he drags the bathtub in front of the door and gets into attack position. However, to his surprise, Pluto doesn't even try to open the door. After defeating the dog, the crazy man breaks through the wall and captures Doug. After throwing him away, he tries to eliminate his target with a pickaxe, but Doug manages to dodge his attacks, as he is smaller and more agile than his opponent. During the fight, Pluto goes into a rage and ends up losing control of his movements. At that moment, Doug finds a way to counterattack and pierces the monster's abdomen with a sharp object. Even so, Pluto remains standing and strikes Doug just after removing the stake from his body. As he falls to the ground, the man is bewildered and becomes an easy target for the attacks that follow. After knocking Doug down, Pluto decides to torture him and, instead of eliminating his opponent once and for all, the man uses an axe to cut off his fingers. Terrified, Doug hides under the table and Pluto takes the opportunity to terrorize him as much as possible before delivering the final blow. When he realizes that his older brother is about to eliminate yet another victim, Christ smiles as he watches the carnage. But instead of giving in, Doug takes a Phillips screwdriver and pierces Pluto's foot. As the monster screams in pain, the man uses a flagpole to pierce his enemy's neck. He then picks up the axe to deliver the final blow and cleaves Pluto's skull in half with a single blow. After getting rid of Christ, Doug leaves the house and violently attacks all the mutants he comes across. As he was spared because he was completely weakened, Christ witnesses the massacre and contacts Lizard to order him to eliminate the baby. However, just after giving the order, the creature is attacked by Beastie, who survived the fight against Pluto and is thirsty for revenge against those monsters. After hearing his brother's message, Lizard takes a blade to cut the baby and orders Ruby to stay away. Worried about the fate Catherine is about to face, the girl tries to stop Lizard from getting any closer, but can't convince him to leave the child alone. Meanwhile, Doug continues his search for his daughter and enters a nursery, where he finds two deformed children playing on the floor. Frightened by the scene, the man flees and Lizard discovers that Ruby has put a pig in the baby's place. In an attempt to save Catherine's life, the girl flees into the hills and Doug goes after her to rescue his daughter. That afternoon, Bobby and Brenda build a trap to get rid of the mutants, as they are convinced that they will attempt another attack. When he realizes that someone has broken through the perimeter, the young man prepares to shoot, but finds no one nearby. Noticing that his mother's body is missing, he orders Brenda to lock herself in the trailer and goes out to investigate the perimeter. After following the bloodstains left on the ground, Bobby finds his mother and sees her body being devoured by Jupiter. At that moment, the mutant gets up to chase him and the young man runs back to the trailer. Even after being hit by a few shots, Jupiter continues the chase and throws his pickaxe at Bobby, who narrowly manages to dodge it. As he enters the trailer, he sees his sister opening the cooking gas and preparing to blow up the vehicle. At that moment, the mutant breaks the window and tries to capture Brenda, but Bobby helps his sister free herself and ties his enemy's arms so that he is trapped in the trailer. Quickly, the two siblings jump out of the window and run away. After freeing himself from the restraints, Jupiter opens the trailer door and an explosion occurs, causing the psychopath to perish painfully. After taking a shortcut through the hills, Doug manages to catch up with Ruby and the girl promptly hands over the child. However, just as he was about to pick up his daughter, the man is attacked by Lizard and, once again, Doug has to fight back. After dodging the attacks, he ends up being cornered and has the chance to squeeze the wound Lynn made in the monster's leg. At that moment, Lizard manages to knock him down and slams his opponent's head into the ground. Realizing that her brother is about to eliminate Doug, Ruby runs off with the baby and Lizard goes after her. In the meantime, Doug has time to get up and strikes the mutant with his gun. After knocking him down, the man pulls the trigger and eliminates Lizard with numerous shots. Seeing the unconscious monster, Doug drops his gun and picks Catherine up, but Ruby realizes that her brother is still alive. Seeing him reaching for the gun to eliminate Doug and the baby, the girl tries to stop him and jumps on him. At that point, both Ruby and the monster end up falling down the hill and neither of them manages to survive. When she discovers that Jupiter is still alive, Brenda bashes his head in and eliminates the psychopath once and for all. She then sees Doug approaching with Catherine in his arms and Bobby is relieved to see them alive. Relieved, the two siblings run to meet them and celebrate the fact that they managed to escape the attack alive. However, what the group doesn't yet know is that the fight for survival isn't over yet, as they are being watched by someone hiding in the hills. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.